When I first take you into the tiny world of Lilliput, what captures the imagination is not only the astonishing difference in size, but the surprising lessons that come from such a small kingdom. Imagine lying on the ground, unable to move, surrounded by countless tiny figures no taller than your finger. At first, the natural reaction is shock, confusion, even fear. The instinct is to break free, to resist, to push away the small threads that bind. Yet within that moment of helplessness, something greater begins to unfold, a lesson in courage and patience. Courage in this world is not about towering strength or fierce battles. It is about the quiet bravery of facing the unknown with an open mind. The Lilliputians may be small, yet they act with remarkable determination, daring to approach someone who seems impossibly large to them. Their courage is not in physical power, but in their resolve to stand together, to act with unity, and to believe that even the tiniest can make an impact. For the listener, it reminds us that courage does not depend on size or circumstance. It is the spirit inside that matters. Whether in learning a new language, beginning a new journey, or facing a challenge that feels overwhelming, the true test of courage is how calmly and consistently we step forward, even when the odds seem enormous. Patience is the second gift that Lilliput offers. At first, when arrows fly and threads bind, the natural urge is to grow angry, to fight back, to overpower those who cause discomfort. But the wiser choice emerges to hold still, to breathe, to understand before reacting. That patience allows the discovery of who these tiny people are, what they value, and how they live. In a similar way, learning English, or any new skill, requires patience. Words may seem strange at first, grammar rules may feel like chains, and progress may seem slow. Yet, when approached with patience, step by step, what once felt restricting becomes the key to freedom, understanding, and connection. In Lilliput, courage and patience come together like two sides of the same coin. The people there show courage by daring to engage with someone much larger than themselves. The visitor shows patience by choosing not to crush them, not to give in to frustration, but to listen and observe. Together, these two qualities build a bridge between worlds that seemed impossible to connect. And this is where the real adventure begins, not in the struggle, but in the choice to grow through the experience. When seen through the eyes of a learner, this scene becomes more than just a fantastical story. It becomes a mirror. Each of us, at some point, has felt tied down by tiny threads, whether it be fear, self, doubt, or the slow progress of learning. Each of us has faced those little arrows of discouragement that sting, that tempt us to quit. And yet, the lesson is clear. If we hold on with courage and patience, what felt like limitations can turn into opportunities. The threads that bind can also connect. The arrows that sting can teach us resilience. This is the magic of storytelling. It takes something extraordinary and shows us the truth about our ordinary lives. The tiny world of Lilliput may not exist on any map, but it exists in the journey of every learner, every dreamer, every person who dares to see beyond the obvious. It tells us that no matter how small the steps may seem, they carry within them the power to move mountains. It tells us that even when surrounded by challenges that appear endless, a calm heart and a brave spirit can turn the impossible into possible. So, as we walk through the land of Lilliput in our story adventure, let us carry these two companions with us: courage to face the unknown and patience to grow through the process. For in every challenge, no matter how small or great, these are the tools that transform the journey into something extraordinary. And it is in that transformation that true learning and true adventure begins. When the journey carries us away from the tiny land of Lilliput and into the vastness of Brobdingnag, the shift is so striking that it almost feels like stepping into another universe. Here, everything is reversed. Instead of being the giant among the small, suddenly the roles are changed and the sense of power disappears. Buildings stretch like mountains, animals tower like monsters, and the people themselves are so large that even the smallest detail of their faces seems overwhelming. It is in this strange new place that the lessons of humility and perspective begin to reveal themselves. Humility in Brobdingnag is not something that is gently suggested, it is demanded. To walk in a land where every step, every movement is dwarfed by the beings around you is to realize how fragile and dependent you can feel. Suddenly, the strength that once inspired awe in a tiny world is meaningless here. The one who seemed mighty in Lilliput now appears delicate, almost insignificant in the shadow of giants. That experience forces an acknowledgement that greatness is never permanent, and power is always relative. It is a reminder that no matter how important we might feel in one setting, in another we may be small. True humility comes from understanding this balance, from accepting that we are not always the center of every story. Perspective is the second great lesson Brobdingnag offers. When standing at the feet of giants, everything looks different. A simple cup becomes a vessel too heavy to lift. A harmless child seems like a towering figure of strength. Even the most ordinary things, food, furniture, clothes, transform into symbols of power and vulnerability. And in this shift, something powerful happens. The mind opens. Perspective teaches that the way we view the world is never fixed. What seems huge to one person may be tiny to another, and what seems impossible today may feel manageable tomorrow. By seeing life through the eyes of giants, the sense of scale, of importance, of meaning itself begins to change. When these lessons are connected back to learning, the parallel becomes clear. Often, when starting a new language, we feel small and uncertain. Words seem massive, grammar feels like an unshakable mountain, and progress looks far away. Yet with humility, we accept that it is okay to start small, to make mistakes, to not be perfect. And with perspective, we recognize that what feels difficult today will someday feel ordinary, just as the giant's world, once frightening, slowly becomes less overwhelming. The giants of learning, big words, long sentences, complicated expressions, no longer remain impossible. Instead, they become challenges that can be approached step by step. Brobdingnag also whispers another truth about humility. It is not weakness, but strength. To admit smallness in the presence of greatness is not to give up, but to open a door to growth. When one is humble, one is teachable. When one accepts perspective, one learns to see not only from a personal viewpoint, but from the viewpoint of others. This ability transforms how we connect with people, how we use language, and how we live in a world full of differences. In that way, Brobdingnag becomes more than a land of giants. It becomes a mirror of our own journey, reminding us that size, power, and status may change, but wisdom comes from how we respond to those changes. And so, as the story continues, the lesson of Brobdingnag stays with us, that true strength lies not in towering over others, but in learning from the moments when we feel small, and that perspective has the power to change not just how we see the world, but how we live within it. When we move between the worlds of the tiny and the giant, what becomes clear is that size is never just about physical appearance. It is about ways of thinking. In one land, a small figure can carry enormous authority, while in another, a towering presence may still lack wisdom. These contrasts reveal that perspective is not simply a matter of how tall or how strong someone is, but of how values, priorities, and attitudes are shaped by the environment in which people live. Different sizes of worlds bring out different ways of seeing life, and those differences invite us to reflect on our own. In the small world, where everything is measured in delicate proportions, the people focus on details. What might be invisible in a larger setting suddenly becomes important. Rules are precise, rituals are followed carefully, and even the tiniest gestures carry meaning. Their world trains them to pay attention to small matters, to guard their traditions, and to treat even the slightest disagreement with seriousness. From their point of view, greatness lies in structure and control, in maintaining order within a fragile society. Their size has shaped their thinking. They believe that survival depends on precision, and so their minds are tuned toward caution, discipline, and detail. In the land of the giants, however, the way of thinking is entirely different. Here, size gives confidence. What seems fragile and dangerous to smaller beings appears harmless to them. Their problems are not measured in tiny steps, but in vast scales. They see the world with a wider lens, often dismissing what others might consider urgent or vital. To them, details fade and perspective grows broad. Their thinking is shaped by the security of their size. They do not worry about being crushed or overpowered, because nothing around them seems capable of causing such harm. Their lives are less about strict order and more about strength, openness, and practicality. What these two extremes show us is that the environment we live in influences how we think and act. A small world produces minds that value structure, precision, and careful planning. A giant world produces minds that value strength, boldness, and broader vision. Neither is entirely right or wrong. They are simply different responses to different realities. And this realization is powerful because it reminds us that our way of thinking is never absolute. It is shaped by our surroundings, our challenges, and our scale of experience. For anyone learning a language, this truth carries an important message. Sometimes we think too small, worrying about each mistake, each wrong word, each missed detail. At other times, we think too broadly, wanting to speak perfectly at once, without patience for the small steps. But the balance of both worlds teaches us that progress comes when we respect both perspectives. The small steps matter because they build discipline. The big vision matters because it keeps us inspired. If we only focus on the tiny details, we risk becoming trapped in them. If we only dream of the giant picture, we risk losing sight of the foundation that supports it. True learning comes when we carry both ways of thinking together. These contrasting worlds also remind us of the importance of empathy. Just as the tiny people cannot imagine the lives of giants, and the giants cannot fully grasp the fears of the small, we too often fail to see the world from perspectives different from our own. But when we pause and reflect, when we step into the shoes of others, our minds expand. We learn that our way is not the only way, and that wisdom often comes from understanding how others see the world, whether through the careful eyes of the small or the sweeping vision of the great. So, as the journey moves between these lands of different sizes, the real treasure is not found in their castles or courts, but in the shift of understanding they bring. For every small world has something to teach us about detail, discipline, and patience, and every giant world has something to teach us about confidence, vision, and perspective. To carry both lessons within is to walk with balance, to think with clarity, and to live with openness to growth. And that is how different sizes of worlds reflect different ways of thinking, and how those ways of thinking reflect back on us. When we set foot into these extraordinary worlds, filled with tiny figures and towering giants, the adventure does not simply entertain us, it teaches us. Every scene, every moment of surprise, every encounter with something unfamiliar becomes a chance to learn. And one of the most valuable lessons is found in language itself. Storytelling like this is not only about the plot or the imagination, it is also a living classroom where words and expressions come alive. What might seem like a simple tale of travel and discovery quickly becomes a tool for improving vocabulary and deepening our understanding of how language works in real situations. Think about the way new words appear within an adventure. Instead of meeting them in a list or a dictionary, they arrive in moments of action tied to emotion, surprise, or tension. When arrows fly through the air, we remember words like sting, sharp, or pierce because they are felt through the character's pain and fear. When giants lift objects with ease, we understand words like enormous, mighty, or colossal, not as abstract terms, but as living descriptions tied to images in our minds. This is the power of story. It roots language in memory by attaching it to experience. We don't just learn the word, we feel it, and once felt, it stays with us. Expressions too gain a natural home in such adventures. Phrases like 1,000 small swords, or threads that bind, capture the imagination in a way plain grammar cannot. They paint pictures that carry meaning beyond the words themselves. By hearing or reading these expressions within a dramatic setting, we not only understand them, but also sense how to use them. They stop being mechanical rules and start becoming living parts of our own speech. This is why stories are such an effective tool. They give us language in context, language we can remember because it is woven into emotions and images. The adventure also encourages us to use language actively, not passively. When we follow along, we begin to imagine ourselves in the scenes. We ask, what would I say if I woke up tied down by tiny ropes? How would I describe the feeling of being in a giant's hand? This kind of mental participation pushes us to reach for words, to test expressions, to expand our vocabulary. It transforms us from listeners into speakers, from readers into storytellers. Every chapter becomes an opportunity to practice, to take the words from the page and place them into our own sentences, into our own lives. And there is another hidden gift in these stories: repetition without boredom. Key ideas return again and again in different forms. The contrast of small and large, the challenge of fear and courage, the constant shifting between weakness and strength, all of these themes repeat across the journey. With each repetition, familiar words and expressions return, reinforcing themselves in our memory, but never in a dull or mechanical way. Instead, the repetition feels natural, carried by the adventure itself, so that learning happens almost without effort. What makes this method so powerful is the emotional connection. Language learned through dry exercises is often forgotten quickly, but language learned through adventure, through laughter, surprise, even fear, stays with us. When we feel something, we remember the words that describe it. That is why combining language learning with storytelling is so effective. It taps into the natural way our minds hold onto experience. Vocabulary stops being a list to memorize and becomes a set of tools to relive moments, to share feelings, to communicate with life. The more we travel through such adventures, the more confident we become in using the language. New words no longer seem foreign. They become companions from a shared journey. Expressions no longer seem complicated. They become natural ways to tell stories of our own. And in time, we find ourselves not just understanding the adventure, but living it with every phrase, every sentence, strengthening our command of English. That is how experiencing the adventure becomes more than entertainment. it becomes a bridge, carrying us into a richer world of vocabulary and expression, and making the language our own. When we step into the world of storytelling, something magical happens. The moment a story begins, the mind awakens with images, sounds, and emotions that no textbook alone can provide. Imagination takes hold, and suddenly, learning is not about rules and memorization, but about living an experience. This is the secret power of connecting storytelling with imagination. It turns the process of learning English into an adventure that excites rather than exhausts, inspires rather than intimidates. Stories create a setting where words are no longer isolated symbols on a page. They belong to characters, to places, to actions, and to feelings. When a person finds themselves in a tiny kingdom or facing the awe of a land filled with giants, the imagination cannot help but picture it. Each word then becomes a brushstroke on a canvas of thought. Instead of memorizing the word tiny or gigantic, we see it, we feel it, and we live it through imagination. And when words come alive like this, they are remembered not because we tried to hold them, but because they touched something deeper inside us. Imagination also gives permission to explore without fear. In storytelling, there are no wrong answers when we picture a scene, only our own interpretation. That freedom encourages learners to play with words, to test expressions, to invent dialogues and describe details in their own way. The act of imagining pushes us to stretch language beyond the simple and safe into creative and expressive use. This is where growth happens. Instead of sticking to the same familiar phrases, we start to experiment, to take risks, to discover new ways of saying things. And because the imagination is guiding us, the risks feel less like mistakes and more like discoveries. Another reason storytelling and imagination make learning exciting is that they create an emotional bond. Stories carry feelings, fear, joy, surprise, wonder, and imagination allows us to share those feelings with the characters. When arrows fly, when ropes bind, when giants tower, we are not just observers, we are participants. And when we feel the story, the language used to tell it becomes meaningful. Words tied to emotion stay longer in memory because they are no longer abstract. They are part of an experience we lived through imagination. This connection between story and imagination also builds curiosity, which is one of the greatest motivators for learning. We want to know what happens next. We want to see how the characters survive, what they discover, and how they change. That curiosity keeps us engaged, and with every new twist in the story, new words and expressions are revealed naturally. Instead of being forced to memorize, we welcome the new language because it is part of the adventure we are following. Curiosity transforms learning from a task into a journey, one we are eager to continue. Storytelling also nurtures creativity and expression. When the imagination is activated, learners begin to describe what they see in their own minds, often finding words that surprise even themselves. They compare, they invent, they draw from their own experiences to give shape to the story. This is not mechanical learning. It is personal, expressive learning that reflects individuality. And in doing so, learners gain confidence because they are not only repeating what they are told, they are creating with the language. That creativity makes English feel like a tool for expression, not a barrier to overcome. And perhaps the most exciting part is that storytelling invites endless possibilities. Imagination allows the same story to be different for every person who hears it. One may picture the ropes of Lilliput as threads of silk, another as chains of grass. One may imagine the giants as kind protectors, another as terrifying figures. This variety means that no two experiences of learning are alike, and that uniqueness makes the journey deeply personal. It keeps learning alive, fresh, and full of surprises. So, when storytelling and imagination walk hand in hand, English learning transforms into something much greater than study. It becomes play, discovery, and adventure all at once. And when learning feels like an adventure, it is not only more effective, but also endlessly exciting. When we travel through adventure tales, it is easy at first to be caught up in the excitement of the journey. The strange lands, the unexpected dangers, the remarkable people and creatures that appear along the way. But beneath the surface of these thrilling moments, there lies something even more valuable. Adventure stories carry life lessons within them, lessons that speak to courage, humility, patience, and understanding. And while we follow those lessons, the very act of engaging with the story also sharpens our language skills. It is as if two treasures are given at once, wisdom for the heart and knowledge for the mind. Life lessons often come to us in subtle ways through these stories. When a character is tied down by tiny ropes and learns to stay calm instead of lashing out, we see the importance of patience in the face of discomfort. When they walk among giants and feel small, we are reminded that humility is a strength, not a weakness. Each of these moments is not just entertainment. It is a reflection of truths we face in our own lives. Adventure tales are mirrors, showing us how to act when we are challenged, how to endure when we feel weak, and how to respect perspectives that are different from our own. They teach without preaching, offering wisdom wrapped in imagination. At the same time, these stories work quietly on our language. Every description of a scene, every dialogue, every conflict is filled with words and expressions that enrich our vocabulary. But what makes this learning special is that it never feels forced. We are not sitting with a list of words to memorize, we are experiencing them in action. When arrows fly, when giants speak, when strange customs are explained, new words arrive naturally, connected to situations that our minds can easily picture. And because those words are linked to images, emotions, and actions, they stay with us far longer than if we had learned them in isolation. The lessons and the language often reinforce each other. For example, learning the word fragile becomes more powerful when we see it not only as an English term, but also as a truth about the smallness of life in certain worlds. Understanding the expression "to be tied down" is easier when we feel it through the helplessness of the character, and then realize how it applies to our own struggles in daily life. This blending of language and meaning makes every word richer, because it carries both knowledge and wisdom. Adventure tales also show us that growth comes through challenges. The characters rarely have an easy path. They must face fear, confusion, and sometimes even rejection. Yet through those struggles, they become stronger. In the same way, learning a language is not without its challenges. We stumble, we make mistakes, we feel uncertain. But if the story reminds us that growth is born in difficulty, then every mistake becomes less of a failure and more of a step forward. This is a life lesson that also strengthens our language journey, to embrace struggle as part of progress. There is also a deeper lesson about perspective. In one land, the character is powerful, in another, they are powerless. This constant shift teaches us that the way we see ourselves depends on where we are and who surrounds us. It encourages us to respect both our strengths and our weaknesses. And as we absorb this truth, we also notice how language itself offers new perspectives. The same word can carry many meanings depending on how it is used. The same expression can change its tone depending on context. By paying attention to stories, we learn not just words, but the flexibility of words, the richness of communication, and the art of understanding others. What makes adventure stories so effective is that they teach with joy. We do not feel lectured or tested. Instead, we are entertained, surprised, sometimes even moved. The lessons slip into our minds because we are open, engaged, and curious. And as those lessons take root, the language around them takes root as well. It is a natural process, one that combines imagination with memory and learning with growth. That is why adventure tales remain one of the most powerful ways to both discover life's wisdom and strengthen our language, because they remind us that learning and living are always part of the same journey. And so, as we journeyed from the tiny ropes of Lilliput to the towering halls of Brobdingnag, each world has given us lessons in courage, patience, humility, and perspective. These adventures showed us that storytelling and imagination make learning not only possible, but exciting and alive. May we carry these lessons forward, using language as both a tool for growth and a bridge to endless discovery.